بسم الله. اقرأ.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. من كتاب شرح الحكم العطائية للإمام علي بن عبد الله بن أحمد باراس إلى أن قال: من جهل المريد أن يسيء الأدب فتؤخر العقوبة عنه، فيقول: لو كان هذا سوء أدب لقطع الإمداد وأوجب البعاد، فقد يقطع المدد عنه من حيث لا يشعر، ولو لم يكن إلا منع المزيد، وقد يقوم مقام البعد من حيث لا يدري، ولو لم يكن إلا أن يخليك وما تريد. من هنا تبعيضية، والجهل له وجوه ظاهرة ووجوه باطنة، والجهل بمجموعه أقبح حالات البعد، فظاهره حالات الكفار والعتاة الفجار، وباطنه سيما المنافقين والضلال المغرورين. والمريد هو كل طالب لمقصد أو مأرب، وأشرف المقاصد وأحسن المآرب وأتحف الرغائب هي إرادة الله مجردا من غير تعلق بمطلب أو تشوف لمأرب، وقد يكون مريدا لما عند الله من الفضل، وكلهم يشملهم اسم الإرادة، وأحاطت بهم دائرة السعادة. وخفاء الجهل في تحقيق الإرادة أولا، ثم تحقيق المراد مما يصعب إلا على أفراد المجذوبين وجهابذة السالكين المحققين. والجهل ظن الأمر على حقيقته واستقامة طريقته. والجهل ظن الأمر على حقيقته واستقامة طريقته.
كيف؟
والتحقيق فيه على خلاف ما ظنه. فجهل الكفار ظاهر حيث آمنوا بالطاغوت وكفروا بالله، وجهل المنافقين حيث خادعوا الله بإظهار الإسلام، والبواطن على خلاف الظواهر. فجهلوا عموم العلم وأنه لا يعلم من خلق، وعلى هذا المنوال من حذا حذوهم ممن يظهر خلاف ما يبطن. وأتاهنا ببعض أحوال المريد في جهله. والمريد يعز عليه أن ينخرط من سلك الإرادة جملة، ولكن يسيء الأدب ويرد موارد العطب. وسوء الأدب هو إتيانه فعلا حضره الله عليه تحريما أو كراهة، أو ترك أمر ندبه إلى فعله وجوبا أو استحبابا. والمريد إذا أينعت له شجرة الأعمال وأشرقت عليه أزهار العلوم وبرزت عليه مخدرات الأحوال من كمائم الوجود، ربما يطول عند ذلك ويصول بوجود ما هنالك، فيستفزه الحرص على إظهار ما أودعه وإذاعة ما استودعه. فيبرز قبل أوان بروزه، فتجف عن وابل المريد أشجاره، وتأفل عن مشاهد اليقين أنواره، وتبقى عنده آثار من تغني تلك الأطيار، ويأنس بما يجده من
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Forgive me for logging in late. Habib logged in earlier than I expected. And right now, the reader is reading, they begin directly in Ibn Ata'illah's aphorisms, and Habib Omar has not yet translated, has not yet commented. And the aphorism that we are doing is Ibn Ata'illah's aphorism. He says, it is from the ignorance of a seeker, and I'm translating the word murid as a seeker, seeker of Allah, someone traveling the spiritual path, to show poor adab, poor manners, and for the punishment to be delayed. But then he says, were this in fact poor manners, the spiritual sustenance or support that I was receiving would have been severed, and this would have necessitated my being distanced. But so he assumes that it wasn't poor adab because he wasn't cut off. However, Ibn Ata'illah continues, but the spiritual support or increase may be severed, and he's unaware. And if it was nothing other than a prevention of increase, that would be sufficient. And he may be placed in a distant station and he's unaware. And if the punishment was only that Allah leave you, the pronoun is to Allah, Allah leave you with what you want. Just go ahead and get what you want, rather than being waliyadu billah ta'ala. La ilaha illallah. So then here in commentary, Sheikh Ali Baras, he says, ignorance is of various types, outward and inward. Ignorance is of various types, outward and inward. And all of it is from, all types of ignorance are from the most ugly states of distance. So from the outward, or you could say the evident or apparent types of ignorance are the states of the unbelievers and the obstinate or the transgressing corrupt people, the people, corrupt transgressors. And from the inward or unapparent types of ignorance are particularly the states of hypocrites or those that are misguided and deluded. And a murid here, which I translated as seeker. He says, Huwa kulli talib li maqsad aw ma'rab. A murid here is everyone who's seeking an aim or something they hope for. And the most noble of aims and the best of pursuits and the best thing that is desired is seeking Allah alone, without any other aim or any other hope. And that's who's being referred to, the one who's seeking Allah alone, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this person may be seeking what's with Allah of grace. And all of those can, this word can be used for them. And the verb of it is irada, really the masdar if you know some Arabic, but the person is the murid, and that's what they call it, the active participle. All of them are included in irada, and all of them are encompassed by sa'ada, which is felicity or salvation. And ignorance about true realization of one's pursuit is very subtle. And then attaining what is sought, that's difficult except for a few. La ilaha illallah. And realizing or truly attaining what is sought is difficult except on individuals who are they're majdub, they're pulled by the divine attraction. And some of the excellent travelers who are realized. And ignorance is believing something is other than it is. Ignorance is believing something as other than it is. And also in the case, and perhaps this is in the case of the seeker, and not being upright in its path. And he said, so the ignorance of the unbelievers is evident. They believe in Taghut and disbelieve in Allah. And Taghut, from its meanings, is the devil, and it has other meanings too. And the ignorance of hypocrites is from the point of view of they're trying to trick Allah, ta'ala, and feign al-Islam. And inwardly, they are different than they are outwardly. And they were ignorant of the general knowledge that is that the Creator knows, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, and anyone who reveals other than what he conceals, and we seek refuge in Allah from this, they resemble hypocrites. وَلِيَعْذُ بِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And he said, and here he mentioned the ignorance of, or some of the states of seekers, murids, plural muridun, in their ignorance. And he said, and it's difficult for a seeker to entirely leave his path of pursuit, right? His path, his suluk, the path he's on, who he's seeking, to entirely leave the path, that's difficult. However, he may show poor adab, poor manners in his path. You see al-adab, right? He may show poor manners in his path. And because of that, fall into perdition, fall into doom along that path, or come close to those places of doom. And poor adab is doing something that in Allah's presence is, no, I believe there's a misprint here. It's to do something that is, Allah has prohibited him, either in the way of it being haram or it being offensive. And Habib is commenting now, Habib Omar's commenting. We praise Allah who gave us the lights of guidance and being led to him. And he, that which he has decreed for those who, he's decreed for the people of salvation to make these blessings reach them. And there's no God other than him. His is all power, praise. He gives life, he gives death. He sent his chosen, the Al-Mukhtar, the one who combines all of his secrets and lights, Muhammad, with the true religion. He transmitted the message, fulfilled the trust, and Allah guided through Prophet Muhammad those for whom salvation was ordained. May prayers and peace be upon his family and companions, the leaders of leaders, and those who follow them for Allah's sake, or show allegiance for them with Allah's sake. And may these be upon his forefathers and brothers of prophets and messengers, and maybe upon their families and companions, and the angels brought near, and upon all of Allah's pious servants, and may this be upon us with them and among them. Surely He is the most generous of the generous and the most merciful of the merciful. So proceed. And the Shaykh here, he clarifies causes of harm in the path so that they don't slip, so they are not blocked, and from the tricks that are played upon the travelers, so they leave travel to the highest stations to what would cause them to be destroyed. And he's mentioning the things that occur for someone who's traveling to Ar-Rahman, of the plots of the lower self, capricious desire, and the shaitan. And Allah said, as on the tongue of Iblis, I will sit and wait for them on your straight path. So most of his effort is against those who travel the path, who travel the straight path. He tries to prevent them anyway, to try to sever their progress anyway. And those who slip and travel along the path of slipping from the straight path, they are the armies of Iblis, of the devil. And he said the people of, and he said he waits for them on their straight path, on the straight path. And he'll use those who are misguided, if he can, against one of the people who are on the straight path. However, most of his efforts are against the people who are upon the straight path. And in those verses, Allah mentions that he said he will come to them from the right and the left and so on, right, from the various directions. And then Allah said in those verses, surely I'll fill hell with you and those who follow you. And in the journey to Allah, Ar-Rahman, if Allah gives someone Islam and Iman, and this person wants to arrive at the knowledge of his master and dwell in the stations of nearness to Allah, love of Allah, Allah's good pleasure, knowledge of Allah, when he makes this strong resolve and this high aspiration, in that state, his enemy cannot turn him back, cannot prevent him, because his enemy, his plot is weak. So he'll wait for an opportunity after that, when he begins to travel, and then maybe he'll become lax, or maybe lights will dawn upon him as a result of some of his deeds. So then he'll delude him through this. He will take advantage of his haste, and he'll change his aspiration and his pursuit to wanting to become public, to notoriety. So then he'll start to make them start to desire the people's wealth. He might use that as a trick against him. Or he might trick him or deceive him another way where he doesn't feel it until, and he may, for a period of time, be deceived, and then many people are harmed in their path by that. Just as in the physical realm, people in various efforts, this person parts from the effort, this other person turns against it. Similarly, this spiritual path, this metaphysical path, the journey to Allah. Imam al-Ghazali, he said, it's very rare. Those who travel this path are rare, and those who are steadfast are rare. And among those who are steadfast, the ones who actually arrive are rare. And Allah said, and few of my servants are very grateful, ash-shakur. He said, so beware of ignorance in your travel, in your journey to Allah. From the ignorance of a seeker is that he show poor adab, poor manners, not performing something that's recommended, or an obligation, or doing something that Allah has made offensive or prohibited or haram, outwardly or inwardly. So the punishment is delayed. And he said, if this were bad adab, my spiritual sustenance would have been cut off and I would have been distanced, just as the unbelievers say. They say, bring what you threat if you're really messengers. Bring what you threaten. And Nuh said, it's going to come when Allah wills. You have not escaped Allah's power. And he said, how could you seek that the punishment come? He said, what if it came suddenly and you were adverse? Would anyone other than the wrongdoers be killed, perish? If it came by night or came by day, why are they trying to rush it? And when that came against them, and this is now mentioning, no, that's the people that knew. He said, when it came, he said, would your faith now benefit you? And previously you were disbelievers. So he said, if this were poor manners, the spiritual sustenance would have been cut off and it would have been a cause of distance. But he might be cut off and he's unaware. And if it only is prevented from progress, if the punishment is only is being prevented from progress, and he may be placed in a distant station where he didn't know. And if the punishment were only that he leave you with what you want, meaning Allah's stewardship and concern be removed from you. We ask Allah that he not turn us over to ourselves for one breath, for the twinkling of an eye. Don't leave me to myself. Don't turn me over to myself or any of your creatures for the twinkling of an eye. That would be a great misfortune. So we ask that he always be the one that cares for us. And he said, otherwise, you would have been exposed to doom, to destruction. So ignorance has various types, outward and inward, or apparent and unapparent. What's apparent are the states of the unbelievers or the transgressing, corrupt people, or an unevident type of ignorance is the hypocrites and the misguidance of those who are deluded. And Imam al-Ghazali, he wrote a book about delusions, and he mentioned some of the delusions of the people of Tasawwuf. And he said that the effort of Iblis is against those. And he wants to prevent them from arriving at the knowledge of Allah. And he harms those he can, and he deludes those he can. And except those servants whom Allah cares for and does not give the Iblis any power against them, or the evil commanding soul. And woe to the one who Al-Jabbar turns him over to himself. And it comes in a hadith or a tradition. If you turn us over to ourselves, you turn us over to incapacity, decrease, deficiency, and weakness. Someone who's turned over to weakness, impotence, deficiency, that is a great misfortune. We ask Allah to care for us. Allah is the wali. He cares for those who believe. He brings them out of darkness to light. And the aim here of murid, a seeker, is the one who seeks the countenance of Allah. He seeks the arrival at the knowledge of Allah. And the most noble type of seeking is seeking Allah. Either he wants Allah's grace, what's with Allah of grace, and generosity and reward. And the second, he knows Allah's grace, but he knows the aim is Allah. You seek his entity. As for his grace, and he said, he does as he wills, but the aim is him. That's a more noble, someone who seeks Allah without any other aim or hope. Not anything celestial or terrestrial, high or low. He seeks Allah. They want his countenance. You let your soul be patient with those who pray to Allah on morning eating, seeking his countenance. This is one. And this one who wants what wants Allah's grace, he seeks Allah's grace. Each of them is included in this word, and as was mentioned, and subtly his ignorance is in the beginning. First of all, his ignorance is subtle, and then attaining what is sought is even more difficult, except for individuals. And ignorance is thinking something as other than it is, right? Believing something other than it is properly. It is Jahal is imagining something as other than it is. And he said, and one of them was studying some of the statements of the Arifin that are very difficult to understand. He said, well, I just read what I understand and leave what I don't understand. He said, the problem is that you might think you've understood something and you misunderstood it. And he said, what you don't understand, no problem. But when you think you understand and you misunderstood, he said, that's what we fear for you. And he said, this is ignorance. And that's called compound ignorance. As for not knowing something entirely, they call that simple ignorance. He doesn't know, no problem. And then he'll be taught and he'll know. But imagining something as other than it in fact is, that is compound ignorance. And there was a man who was called and there's an ignorant man, and they said in poetry that if this were fair, his donkey should be riding him, right? He should be riding him with the other billah ta'ala. And it's metaphorically speaking of the donkey. Were this in fact fair, I should be riding him. And however, this person is in the form of a man, and animals are given to be are placed in their service. So ignorance is thinking. So he thinks that this is accurate and his path is correct, and in reality, it's the opposite of what he thought. The ignorance, the evident ignorance of the unbelievers is they believed in other than Allah and disbelieved in Allah. And the ignorance of the hypocrites, they think they're tricking Allah. And anyone who reveals other than what they conceal resembles them. And then here he mentions some of the states of ignorance of seekers. So there are various types of ignorance, and this is one of them. And it's difficult for a true seeker to truly leave the path entirely. However, he may have misconduct, poor manners, doing something that Allah has forbidden or made offensive, haram or makruh, outwardly or inwardly, or leaving something recommended, whether it is an obligation or a recommendation. This is poor manners, la ilaha illallah. And that is of degrees and levels. And a seeker, when he has the tree of deeds, he sees the tree of deeds, and there are flowers upon it and other things, then things that are hidden of states, perhaps he'll stop there and he'll think that he arrived. They make the example. Someone is continuing to learn until he thinks that now he knows. When he thinks that he knows, he's ignorant. Then he's become ignorant. La ilaha illallah. Allah said, say, I reveal on the tongue. I couldn't change this from myself. I only know what Allah reveals to me. This is on the tongues of prophets, right? Many seekers, he leaves lowly things. He turns to Allah. He finds softness of heart, awe, submission, khushu'. So some hidden things become revealed to him. And then he thinks he's arrived at the knowledge of Allah. And then he wants to reveal what he's learned. So then he will proclaim, like he'll become La ilaha illallah. And he said that and he said from the most ugly of things is someone who seeks a position of leadership prior to its proper time. And he said a dog is less vile than that person. And he's saying it in rhyme, right? From the most lowly of things is to try to place yourself in a position of leadership prior to its proper time. And he said, so then he rushes and he tries to reveal what he's known prior to its proper time, right? Prior to its coming to true fruition. So then he is cut off from that tree and from its lights. However, the effects of that remain with him. And then he's comforted by the presence of those things. Just as the person gradually ascended, they gradually descend. They gradually fall, so they don't perceive it. So like someone who's sitting in a plane and they're not paying attention, the plane will land and without even them feeling it. He's talking or reading or having, then all of a sudden, boom, it touches to the ground. And similarly, this person gradually falling, and by the vain desires and his ego, he doesn't think he's negligent, he's not falling, he's being good and everything. He's someone of divine election, someone of distinction. Boom, it's all the way down. He's all, and then now nothing will benefit him. And he continues, and then he distances himself from places of nearness, and he begins to commit wicked acts. And just as someone gradually unveilings occur gradually, veiling occurs gradually. And he said, as for the unveiling to happen first, that happens to some of those who are majdub and prophets. And he said, unveilings happen to some of those who are majdub, which means they're pulled to nearness, awareness. And he said, a few people, they're all of a sudden veiled, right? But that's rare. And he said, some people are stripped of their state suddenly and quickly to the extent that they don't even know Fatiha anymore. And some of them perceive their loss, and they try to find the cause and make amends, and then they can redress their problem. But otherwise, la ilaha illallah. And a cause of being entirely stripped is for veil after veil to pile on the others until the armies of darkness overcome them, and then that person is led by vain desire, hawa, and then they're disgraced, and they make a claim. They make a claim for something that they don't possess. And then And then that person, another person, or another example of the same, the person may become jealous of those who really know. So they start to fake dreams or visions or what have you. And he said, so this person, they are fond of their states that were a cause of distance. So they start to be fond of their own wicked actions, even their own poor manners, and then they're pleased with themselves. And previously they were suspicious of their own lower selves, and then they became pleased with their lower selves. And Allah said that you should be, Allah was pleased with them and they were pleased with him. You shouldn't be pleased with yourself. Sheikh Abu Bakr said, if someone looks at himself with the eye of pleasure, Allah looks to him with the eye of wrath. And someone who looks to himself with the eye of displeasure, Allah looks to them with the eye of pleasure. He said, those who are true are displeased with their egos, and they receive the gaze of their Lord, and they continue to ascend. So then this person begins to defend his own lower self, and previously he was in opposition to it. So then he begins making its claims or believing its lies. And then he says, if this were really poor manners, the sustenance would have been cut from me. And he said, where is the spiritual sustenance? You've been totally cut off. And he said, support spiritually and assistance, and it were not for ignorance and the extinguishment or the eclipse of the light of his reason, he wouldn't have been cut off. And he said, and then the support that he continues to get, that is the support of desires, and we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this happens in the physical realm as well. Someone, they have an amulet that they recite or a dua to heal illnesses. One of the pious gives them an ijazah in that, and it has an effect. They make this dua, this ruqya, they recite, and it has an effect, and people benefit. And then the person starts to treat women, and he's not careful of her covering her face or her hair or other parts of her body. And then he continued to gradually treat her. And then he falls and he becomes a servant of desires. He's distant from Allah. And then the benefit of this recitation, he may be stripped of it entirely, so he recite and it not be of benefit. And they say, oh, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And then if he says, and then if you come to me in this place, and it's all a lengthy lie. If Allah doesn't, if the concern of Allah does not take control of someone, otherwise they can fall. If the person is turned over to his own lower self or to Iblis, and we say, do not turn us over to ourselves or any of your creation for the twinkling of an eye. So the delay of punishment while forgetting to repent and continuing blameworthy character and reprehensible actions, that is a sign that a severe punishment is coming and that one is going to be exiled. And we see, so the person will, and distance is in committing prohibitions, haram things, and is to be audacious in crimes, and to be distant from the places of nearness. And these are spiritual stations, not physical stations. Repentance, fortitude, dependence on Allah. And he said, so someone who has poor manners is distant from these stations, and it's not a physical distance. And And he said, what are they going to do? Put you down a well to be distant from Allah, right? Put you in a well. And he said, distance is not a physical distance. It's a metaphysical or spiritual distance. And we seek refuge in Allah. And he said, so the distance is due to the occurrence of vain desire, or the descending depths of distance and misguidance. And then the spiritual sustenance may be cut off for them and they don't feel it. So they continue to taste the sweetness of their vain desires, and that firmly overtake them, and then they cannot escape its grasp. And that person will become a loser, and that person be distanced from Allah from where they do not feel, and repentance is not hoped for the person of this in this state. And we ask Allah to protect us from being led to our doom, and from Allah allowing us to destroy ourselves. And may Allah give us to taste the sweetness of nearness to Him. May Allah give us a gift that pulls us to His nearness and gentleness from Him. As Sha'rani, he said, we seek refuge in Allah from Mekr and Istidraj. He said it 3 times. And he said, I seek refuge that I be led astray, where I'm aware or unaware. Oh Allah, we seek refuge from al-Mekr wa Istidraj, from where I am perceive it or don't perceive it. And Mekr literally means plotting, right? Planning. But obviously Allah doesn't need to plan, right? So were he not cut off with anything other than a decrease? And what about his being cut off from an increase? That would be enough. And he said it's Habib is reading. And here he clarifies that if the servant is placed in a station of istidraj, being led to destruction, allowed to destroy himself, and this is what we've described of those who follow their passions. And he said, and distance is the Lord's sustenance or assistance being severed from one, and Allah's favor being prevented from one. And someone not feeling that Allah's sustenance, Allah's support had been cut from him, that's sufficient. And from the worst of misfortunes is for Allah to leave you to yourself. That is from the greatest of misfortunes. Waliyadu billah ta'ala, that Allah leave you to yourself. If he really had a station with Allah, Allah would not leave him with what he wants. So a sign of those brought to Allah is the sign of those who are near to Allah is their hearts being free of everything, and all of their own motives. And we ask you, O Allah, not to sever us, not to veil us, not to leave us to ourselves or any of your creatures for the twinkling of an eye. We ask you by your mercy, and you're the most merciful, the merciful. And you heard the story of this seeker who Iblis was envious of his taking from certain shuyukh, learning from certain shuyukh. So Iblis came and he said, so-and-so, I'm an angel. Iblis, the devil, he said to him, I'm an angel. He came to him at night. Allah has given me permission to take you to Jannah between Maghrib and Isha, which was the time of the class of his sheikh. He said, however, this is a secret. Don't tell anyone. So Iblis would take him, fly with him to a certain place. He says, sit here. He would see trees and see rivers. Here he said, this is Jannah. And then after the time of the lesson was over, he would bring him back to his home. So then he stopped going to his teacher's class for a period of time. And then he said, why'd you stop coming to class? He said, oh, I have an excuse. He said, what's the excuse? He said, I can't speak of it. He said, I'm your sheikh. He said, yes. He said, yes. He said, so by my being your sheikh, you have to, the right of that is that you tell me. He said, it's a secret. He said, no problem. You could tell me the secret. He said, this is your sheikh though. He said, an angel comes and he takes me to Jannah at this time. And the sheikh knew that this was a plot of the devil. He said, listen, because I'm your sheikh, when he comes to you tonight, say no one leaves Jannah. Where the place he takes you to, you stay there. Go sit, remain there, refuse to leave. When he said, I'm taking you, he said, no, I'm not leaving Jannah. I'm going to sit here. He said, inshallah. So then he took him. And he said, I will not leave. And he said, whoa, I only gave you permission in this time. He said, I'm not leaving Jannah. He obeyed the command of his sheikh. The devil tried, and then he left. And then Fajr started to come, the light of Fajr. And he was in the dump. He was in a rubbish heap. And he said all of these were imaginations, fantasies that this devil whispered to him. And then he went to the sheikh. He said, you didn't go to Jannah. He said, Jazakallah khair. He was going to take me far. So the devil saw that he was going to be successful. He said, Jannah was with the sheikh. And then he went, he distanced himself from that paradise, from Jannah. And he said, this is how the shaitan tricks people. And we ask Allah to make us from his servants over whom he gives no power to the shaitan. And we seek refuge in Allah from that. ربي علمني الذي ينفعنا ربي فكهنا وفك أهلنا وكربات لنا في ديننا ذكر أنت وذكر نوهم لما ترتدي كولا وفعلا كرما وسكل كل هذا
ذه مجالس بها غافر الزلل والخطية ذه مجالس